Hey y'all, welcome to the third sidebar of season 3. Yes, I know. This sidebar only covers 4 episodes, but keeping in line with the sidebars being grouped into segments, I felt that this was a good stopping point. But before we get into it, let's recap. The last sidebar covered episodes 6 through 12. In that sidebar, we covered the process of David and Shelonda becoming an official couple. Shelonda starts deluding herself, and she feels that she's being rewarded by fitting into David's life. David and Shelonda both stick to their ends of the bargain. Shelonda follows David's lead, and she becomes the very person that he told her she could be. They get married. In the episode details, I mentioned that Shelonda receives something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. The old thing that she receives is David's last name. The new thing is an island. The borrowed thing is Juanita. Now, for the something blue, I ain't really have anything. So I decided to make the blue be the dark skies that were moving in over their relationship. I mean, I had to have something, right? But anyway, at the end of the segment, David takes Shelonda to Belize, where she realizes that he has purchased an island for them. They all agree to have Juanita come back to the States and be the live-in help. Seems that everything is falling into place. So, now that we are caught up, let's get into the sidebar. Episode 13, Emotional Snapback. Per the details of episode 12, David and Shelonda bring Juanita back to the States with them. They have just left their honeymoon in Belize, and they're getting ready to resume their normal lives. On the plane ride home, David sets some ground rules that are to be followed. 1. As far as the world is concerned, Juanita would be the live-in maid, nothing more, nothing less. 2. They are not to discuss Belize or any of the details thereof. 3. They were not to have any physical interactions with Juanita alone. She would only join if they all unanimously agreed. And 4. Juanita would cook, clean, and care for Cassidy, and David would pay her an agreed-upon sum of money at the end of each week. Juanita was to reside in a mother-in-law suite in the rear of the property. Keeping in line with the promise that David made, Shelonda takes Juanita shopping upon their return. Juanita sees the city and gathers some exposure to the good life. Shelonda is excited about providing experiences for her and Cassidy because that's what David promised. They return from shopping and expect to find a happy David. Instead, Shelonda finds that he's upset. When asked for details, David tells Shelonda, "Thanks to your advice, Tina has asked Sean for a divorce. Everything that he has built for his family has been ruined. This is so because you have failed to follow one simple instruction. That's the only boundary that I gave you as it relates to our friends. I only ask that one thing of you." Shelonda is shocked. Not only is she bothered by the way that David has spoken to her, but she makes a good point. She tells David that he should have had the boundaries conversation with Sean. Maybe then he wouldn't be down a wife. Also a good point. Shelonda did not tell Tina to leave Sean. She told her not to be afraid to leave situations that no longer served her purpose. I mean, gather whatever inferences you want from that. But either way, David ain't like it. Not at all. Completely out the blue, he slapped Shelonda in the face. And the slap was only the beginning. David turns to her and says, and I quote, "Shelley, let me explain something to you. I have tried to understand that we are different. I know your past and the life that you've lived. I can only imagine that you don't know the value of keeping families together and having both parents in the home. I mean, how could you? But this is the thing. We don't operate that way. If you would like to recreate your dysfunction, this is the wrong setting for you to attempt to execute that. Besides, the only business that you should concern yourself with is in this house. And considering the fact that Juanita is here, we can all reasonably assume that you're failing in that area. I think we should take some time to reconsider some things. Since you don't have a realistic expectation of what a healthy family unit is, I don't feel comfortable representing you in the hearing guardianship for Cassidy. Let's revisit this when you figure some things out." I quoted that verbatim because I didn't want to leave any part of it unaddressed. Breaking it down, David did a few things with that one statement. I realized that I left one out, so I'm going to go ahead and say it now. He used all of the information that she gave him on the plane ride to Belize against her. Everything that she told him about her past, he used it in this very precise moment. But I didn't list that, so I'm going to go to number one. Number one, He makes sure that Shelonda observes an obvious difference between the type of person that he is and who he perceives her to be. She came from a broken home, and he wants to highlight that. 2, he used her words to villainize her. He accused her of talking to Tina to create the agenda of breaking up successful relationships. 3, though he hadn't ever expressed a bother related to Shelonda's ability to handle things in the house, he suddenly used Juanita's arrival to imply that she was failing in that area. Like that's why Juanita had to come, because Shelonda couldn't handle it. 4, lastly, he used the situation to explain why he didn't feel comfortable representing her in the guardianship hearing for Cassidy. His rationale? She doesn't have a realistic understanding of what a healthy family unit is, since she goes around and destroys family for her own personal enjoyment. In the present, Shelonda sees the situation for exactly what it is. But at that time, she was hurt by David's words and she internalized it. In her mind, she had to have done something wrong because no one would have had that reaction for no reason, right? But she'd come to realize at some point later down the line that David was playing a dirty game. He wanted to make her feel inadequate, and the occasion was just convenient for him to do so. But because it was the first time, Shelonda takes it as an isolated incident. She apologizes to Juanita and assures her that she has witnessed a rare incident. David returns and tells Juanita that he wants duck breast and asparagus for dinner. When told that the ingredients aren't in the house, David says, "Go get them." And that was the beginning. Episode 14, The Trap. Sidebar. For the purposes of relatability, I have to tell you that David's name was supposed to be in dark red, like nearly burgundy, bold type in the book. But for whatever reason, the color didn't show up in the book. As a result, his name is basically displayed in a deep, bold print, but it's black. There was a very specific reason why that was done. All of Shelonda's love interests had alterations to their names in the book, starting with Ken. Ken's name is spelled with all capital letters. It was supposed to signify the major impact that he had to her life, so his name was always big and bold. The alterations to Antonio's name changed over the course of book 2. Initially, it was spelled in a regular manner. Once she fell in love with him, the last O in his name turned into a heart, and once he died, that O was replaced with a broken black heart. His name was always an indicator of how she felt at the time. Having David's name be in bold print was intended to look cautionary, like he's dangerous. Probably would have worked out better if the color came through, but still the same. There's an alteration to Juanita's name as well. The J in her name is super fancy. It's supposed to look whimsical, like this beautiful, happy thing. That's just a little tidbit of info that you would have observed by reading the book. Anyway, David, in deep, bold print, really starts to show some things in episode 14. Everything was somewhat cool in the beginning. Juanita was everything they thought she'd be and more. Then the first issue presents itself. David's schedule is unpredictable due to a couple of factors. His work schedule is one thing. The other is Sean. Tina has left Sean, and he's obviously lost without her. When he's feeling down, David goes to the bar with him after work. He can't cook, so he usually eats out. When he doesn't want to eat out, he eats with them. But here's the kicker. Sean doesn't talk to Shelonda. He blames her for the downfall of his marriage. Not himself for his behavior, solely her. David, being in agreement, says he owes you nothing, not even conversation. This is extremely impactful and bothersome to Shelonda because it's the first time that David has joined someone else in being adversarial towards her. Keep in mind that he has always challenged anyone who's had an issue with Shelonda. Suddenly, he's on somebody else's team against her, and that's hurtful. I think Shelonda makes an amazing point. David had some pretty strict mandates on time and time management. Yet, he never took the time to inform Shelonda that he'd be late. That seems like a pretty reasonable expectation in a marriage, especially since Shelonda notes that she'd often talk to him during the day, and he'd never mentioned the fact that he'd be late. He was showing her that he would not give her the respect that he dedicated to most other things. David wouldn't ever have been late to a dinner or a business meeting. Yet, he had no problem failing to inform his wife that he'd be late or wouldn't be arriving at all. Nonetheless, they continue on with life. I think it's important to note that Shelonda says she could have tolerated David with the mindset that she had at the time. I think that's telling because we've already seen some red flags. But they were obviously not impactful enough to Shelonda because David provided a life that she felt good about otherwise. The issue really came about when she began to witness the maltreatment of Juanita. This is when we really start to witness some of David's shyst, if you will. I'm not sure if that's a word, but it feels right. Shyst, like somebody's ability to be shysty. I don't know. We'll look it up later. But anyway, David starts out by reneging on the promise to pay Juanita. He did for a little while, but then he insisted that they didn't owe her anything based on the fact that they had provided an out for her to leave Belize. He says that living with them was payment enough, which sounds legit if that was the arrangement, but it wasn't. Juanita joined the household with the understanding that she'd be paid actual money, not like Trident and gum. So Shelonda starts paying her behind David's back, to be fair. But it wasn't just the money. Shelonda is bothered by the fact that David talks at Juanita, not to Juanita, and he allows their friends to be disrespectful towards her as well. David was on some mess. He's intentionally hurtful to Juanita by making her read the envelope for the day aloud, fully aware that she doesn't read well. He laughs at her discomfort. He's also rough and uncaring during sex, completely contrary to the interactions that they all shared in Belize. The situation causes Shelonda to reflect back to a conversation with Antonio. And of course, he uses an animal reference because that's what he does. To quote, Antonio said, "This is the thing, little girl. Everyone is chasing something. People like me and you chase money. That's what we do. But it's different for them. People who do drugs are chasing a feeling. It's the feeling that they had the very first time they tried that drug, a feeling that they most likely won't ever experience again, yet they'll continue to drive. It's our job to give them the promise of that feeling that they're chasing because that gives us the money that we're chasing. It's like a rabbit trap. Rabbit traps are effective because they're easy to get into and nearly impossible to get out of. The rabbit sees something inviting inside of the trap and they're lured in. Once inside, the owner of the trap can use the situation as he sees fit. He can feed the rabbit until he's ready to eat it, or he can dispose of it otherwise. Either way, the choice is his. Have you ever wondered why some drug dealers are willing to give the first hit for free? Because that's the nature of the trap. You lure them in with the promise of a good feeling for free. Once inside of that trap, it's almost impossible to get out. Once you have developed an addict, you have a steady stream of income from them. You also have someone who will do your bidding for little more than what you can afford to give away for free. Why? Because they're chasing that feeling. That's the trap. Shelonda realizes that David has trapped Juanita in the same way. He dangled the possibility of a good life to trap her. Once she was in the U.S., he basically did whatever he wanted because he didn't feel that she had options otherwise. Shelonda felt horrible about Juanita's predicament, but she felt that she would be creating a disservice for her if she sends her back to Belize. So she decides that it's in her best interest to stay, even at the expense of dealing with David. Episode 15, Locked Box. Shelonda comes home from work and Juanita is obviously bothered. Why? Well, she found a locked box under David's sink. Shelonda doesn't see the harm. She too has a box, her keepsake box. She feels that David is entitled to that same privacy. But Juanita is concerned about what's in the box. It turns out that there are drugs in the box. Lots of drugs. Shelonda deduces that they're for David's personal use and suddenly understands the change in his behavior. Oh, yeah. Let's not skip over the fact that the episode starts by Shelonda admitting that she was having an affair with Juanita. Yes. David started to spend more time away from home, and he doesn't come home sometimes at all. But she doesn't care because she's fallen in love with Juanita. Okay, back to the box. Shelonda was like, "You pried open the box?" And Juanita was like, "No, it was unlocked already. I just looked inside." Anyway, it was drugs. Okay. Shelonda realizes that they have a serious issue. Realizing that the escalation in drug use coincides with the escalation of David's behavior, Shelonda realizes that he will likely get worse. And when he gets worse, he's gonna treat Juanita worse. She realizes that Juanita needs to get out of there. So she offers Grandma's house and the car that she got from Antonio. She realizes that she must really love her because she hadn't ever considered allowing someone to live there, and she could have been getting some rent out of it. Shelonda comes to the conclusion that Juanita is the person that she wants to be with, so she's making a plan to leave David to be with her when it's convenient. But for the time being, she moves Juanita's stuff out a little bit at a time. eventually relocating her to Grandma's and saying that she left on her own accord. Juanita cooked food every day, and Shelonda took it home and reheated it. Juanita came over on Thursday to deep clean because that's the day that David started not to come home at all on Thursdays. It seems that everything was working out until episode 16, no longer. Sidebar. I recorded episodes 13 through 16 on the same day. I was super exhausted by the end. So much so that I was stammering over words like crazy. But, like I told y'all, I record on an unpredictable schedule, basically when time permits. Due to a change in my work schedule, I had a little extra time this week. So I decided to just roll and get as much done as I could get done. I was nearly delirious by the end of episode 16, and I definitely noticed it in my recordings. So if you did too, mind your business. Anyway, we got her done, and I lived to record another day. Could have been worse. Anyway, episode 16. Shelonda was having a good day. She put her Whitney Houston CD on and everything. Then David came trotting through the door. He walks in like ain't a thing wrong. Then he asked Shelonda to join him in the living room, where he performs a soliloquy. I'm not going to word for word it, but David showed his hind parts. Basically, he was like, Shelly, I know everything because I'm always several steps ahead of you. David tells Shelonda that he's aware of the relationship between her and Juanita. And he also says that he knew that she found his drug box, but it was none of her business. How does he know? Well, because he has cameras all over the house. And while Shelonda thought she knew everything that was in that house, as she told Juanita, she had no idea. He watched the cameras and realized that Shelonda is having an affair with Juanita and that she helped Juanita leave. And he's obviously followed her because he knows that she stashed Juanita at Grandma's house. And then he drops the bomb. So that's why I'm a bit late, sweetheart. Unfortunately for you, your little situation in the country is no longer. You're set to receive a hefty insurance payout. But as the executor of your estate, trust me when I tell you that you won't see a penny of it. Don't look so surprised, sweetheart. You don't remember signing all of your assets over to me? I have the paperwork right here. David has obviously done something to Juanita and destroyed Grandma's house. But the additional gut punch is in the fact that he has forged her signature and got control of all her assets. Shelonda's like, dude, you win, but I'm out. And that's when David drops more bombs. He doesn't want to be with her, but he refuses to let her leave because he wants to keep up public perception. And to make sure she's trapped, he has been strategically destroying her credit over those months. That's a lot of heavy thinking. This dude's a lunatic. But Shelonda feels trapped, and she knows he'll do whatever it takes to discredit her if she leaves and tries to get Cassidy. She realized that David has done to her what she watched him do to others. She decides that she has to come up with a great plan, but for the time being, she's stuck. And boy, was she stuck. David told her that she could no longer work outside of the house, and she couldn't listen to Whitney Houston. Let's not forget that part. And she basically was the new Juanita. David made Shelonda do all of the things that Juanita had to do, even down to having an envelope for each day. But there was so much malice attached to it. He put all of the envelopes in the drawer at the same time, but she could only read the one for that day. And because she knew she was being watched, she had to stick strictly to what he requested. Additionally, the uncaring sex that he had with Juanita was kicked up a notch. David would actually rape Shelonda and call her Juanita while doing so. He gave her a debit card, and strictly monitored the funds, even shutting down the card at his leisure. Shelonda is forced to think about previous incident where she judged the situations of others, like when Cream didn't open the envelopes, or when Tina was being controlled by Sean. She realizes that she has basically swapped places with them. David controlled everything, from what pictures and decor could be displayed in the house to how many calories she should ingest, even making her burn off the calories from a cheesecake that he forced her to eat. I said it was 1,500 calories. Years later, I realized that an entire cheesecake probably should have been more calories than that. I don't really know. Either way, there were physical and emotional implications to not following the rules. So Shelonda tried to stay in line, but it wouldn't ever have been enough because David designed it all to make sure she failed. And when she failed, he used that to delay the proceedings for Cassidy. He even started bringing other women into the house. Shelonda pretended to be hurt, but she was actually happy because if he was with someone else, he wasn't with her. And in the meantime, his drug habit is escalating. Shelonda realizes that the life that she thought she'd have with David is no longer. And that's the end of this sidebar. The next episode is called Phase 1, Flirt with Disaster. As usual, the beginning of this segment will introduce a change in the relationship between Shelonda and David. And it's probably the craziest one yet. We'll let some more build up, and we'll discuss it on the next sidebar with Chinney. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Chinney Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.